there be carnage.
Hello Internet, my name is Damian Michaels, but you can call me Blue, and welcome back to another episode of Blues Brews. This week, we're once again moving forward with our commitment to playing each legal companion in Historic Brawl. We started with Umori a couple weeks ago, and we played Zerda last week. This week, we're doing something a little odd and playing Obosh the Prey Piercer. So Obosh was one of those companions I was most worried about being good, because I had no idea how I was going to handle this restriction. I tried Rakdos Good Stuff, but it felt like I was missing so many good cards. I tried Rakdos Sacrifice with the other Judith and Obnixilis, but once again, so many good pieces were at 2 and 4 mana that I felt Obosh was actively making the deck worse by having it. And the goal is to build a deck that takes advantage of both the companion and commander, but is functional despite the restriction if we can't use the companion for whatever reason. Nothing I tried was living up to its full potential, and I almost gave up on Obosh. Until I was crafting packs and opened a Judith Carnage Connoisseur and realized I had the perfect commander. Judith herself doesn't work that well with Obosh, but she naturally wants to play a bunch of cards that you'd already want for Obosh anyway. Cards like Gutter Snipe and Fiery Inscription get buffed majorly by Obosh and are great support for the Spellslinger type deck Judith encourages. We have a ton of damage-based removal that works well with Obosh and Judith alike, such as Lightning Bolt, March of Wretched Sorrows, and Kolaghan's Command, as well as sweepers like Brotherhood's End, Hour of Devastation, and Star of Extinction. In addition to all of this, we're also leaning into Judith giving our spells Death Touch by playing cards like End the Festivities and Tectonic Hazards to serve as 1-mana sweepers. We do have some hard removal like Bedevil, Murderous Rider, and Bloodchief's Thirst for necessary situations, and they still work with Judith, allowing us to make a token instead of giving it lifelink and Death Touch. Anyway, that's most of everything, so we're just going to jump into the games and show off the rest from there. Game 1, we're on the play against Venzer, and we keep at 7. We start things off with a Den of the Bugbear and run out Darcy. We send it to the opponent, and they just play an island before passing. We untap and immediately attack for 1. Next we play a tap land and pass it back. Opponent untaps and plays a Swamp, followed by Venzer Corpse Puppet before they pass. We untap and play an untapped Blood Crypt, followed by Swift End to get Venzer off the board. We Surveil Burn Down the House to the graveyard and attack for 1. Opponent untaps and plays a Hall of Oracles, and after much deliberation, finally decides to run out a Prologue to Phryresis to give us a poison counter before passing. We untap and play a Zakazan before attacking for 1. Post-combat, we run out Palladiumir and pass it back. Opponent untaps and plays a Swamp, followed once again by their commander, and they pass it to us. We untap and play Judith, followed up with a Blazing Volley. This is supposed to be for a full board, but I just don't want them to have Venzer in play. They keep it in the graveyard for some reason, and we attack for 1 before passing the turn. Opponent untaps and runs out a Scheming Aspirant, followed by an island for the turn. Then they play an Experimental Augury to anticipate and proliferate. They ping us with Aspirant, then put a +1/+1 counter on it with Hall of Oracles before passing. We untap, and I was about to play Gix's Command, but decided to play the land first, scrying a Sulphurous Spring to the bottom. Now we play Gix's Command, choosing to put counters on something and make our opponent sacrifice their Aspirant. This triggers Judith, and we make a token, then Surveil a Thoughtseize to the top. We put our counters on Judith and attack for 6 damage before passing it back. Opponent untaps and drops a Swamp, followed by a Tezzeret's Gambit to draw some cards and give us another poison counter before they send it back to us again. We untap and play a Fiery Inscription, which lets us Surveil to put a Chromatic Lantern in the graveyard. It enters, and we choose Darcy as our Ring Bearer. I didn't put it on Judith, even though it was probably correct, because I figured they had some form of interaction, and she's the most likely target. And that's exactly what happened when we cast our Thoughtseize. They make us pick it up with a Serum Snare, but we still get to make a token and Surveil Black Market Connections to the graveyard. Thoughtseize resolves, and we take the Time Warp, which on this board is basically just a growth spiral, but we don't want to take any chances. We move to combat and attack for 3, followed by running out Murderous Rider and passing the turn. Opponent untaps, and kinda as expected, they cast their Contentious Plan to draw a card and give us another poison counter. This is followed up by them cycling a Sugar Rush to target Murderous Rider. They then play an island and run out Astral Cornucopia for X equals 1 and pass the turn back to us. We untap and draw a Dragon Skull Summit, so we run it out and that gives us 8 mana, which is exactly enough to put Obosh in our hand and cast him. So we do exactly that. While this isn't lethal because our tokens don't get doubled since they have a mana value of 0, our opponent still scoops it up. Game 2, we're on the draw against Goreclaw and we keep at 7. Opponent starts with a Forest and passes. We start our turn with a tapped Castle Embereth and pass it back. Opponent untaps and plays a Forest, followed by a Scavenging Ooze before passing. We untap and run out Hive of the Eye Tyrant. We can't do anything worthwhile, so we pass. Opponent untaps and plays a Forest, followed by a Migratory Greathorn on Scooze. This lets them go get a Forest, and they attack for 3 before passing it back. We untap and play a Mountain and a Palladium Mirror before passing the turn. They untap and play a Forest before running out an Iron Scale Hydra. They move to combat and attack for 3 before passing it back. We untap and play an Arid Mesa. We hold on to it for now, but run out a Gilded Lotus and use that mana to cast a Chromatic Lantern and pass the turn. Opponent untaps and plays a Growing Rites of Itlamok, which grabs them an Ichorspit Basilisk. They don't have enough mana to cast it, but they can cast an Essence Symbiote instead. They move to combat and attack us for 8. We crack Arid Mesa in response to get a tap land. We take our hit and go to 10, then opponent passes. We untap, and we have a ton of mana here. We start by tapping our rocks to cast Judith. We have 1 red mana left, so we use that mana and some lands to cast Fiery Inscription, making Judith our Ring Bearer. Afterwards, we ruin our opponent's board with a Blazing Volley, giving it Death Touch to clear everything away. Inscription deals 2 damage to our opponent, and we pass the turn. Opponent untaps and plays a Questing Beast to get in for 4 damage. We're not blocking, so they drop us to 9 before passing it back. We untap and manually tap all of our stuff so we can put Obosh in hand and cast him this turn. Once it's on board, we cast a Stomp to get rid of the Questing Beast. Now just to clarify for those wondering why I gave a Death Touch instead of making a token, Bone Crusher Giant is a 3-drop, so it gets buffed by Obosh, but the Adventure Stomp is a 2-drop, so it doesn't. I learned this the hard way while testing this deck before recording. Inscription hits our opponent for 4 damage, and we attack with Judith for 6 damage before we pass the turn. Opponent untaps and spends their turn playing Goreclaw. They don't do anything else before sending it back to us. On our turn, we untap and immediately run out Bone Crusher Giant. Definitely should have played Lulth first, just in case we drew something better, but it just hits a swamp so we didn't get punished. We move to combat, and we just attack with Obosh. Now, before you say anything about not attacking with Judith, I almost never use Lord of the Ring cards, so I didn't realize Judith couldn't be blocked. So I just casually left 6 damage on the table, but it's whatever. Post-combat, we run out a Boggart Tracker to exile their graveyard and pass the turn. Opponent untaps, and they play Arasta the Endless Web, followed by the Basilisk we knew they had. They can't do anything else, so they pass back. Now, we technically have lethal here, so we could just attack, but I didn't realize that, so I decided to do the fun thing and cast Duress. This makes a token, and we get to shoot our opponent for 4 damage. We take Parallel Lives from their hand and follow this up by casting Burn Down the House to blow up the board. Granted, I was hoping we could get to see how much life this would gain, but Inscription triggers first, killing our opponent before we get to see the final number. Game 3, we're on the draw against Reese, and we keep at 7. Opponent starts with a tapped land and passes the turn. We start things off with a Mountain, followed by Darcy, before we pass. Opponent untaps and plays a tapped Temple Garden and runs out their commander, Reese the Redeemed, before passing. We untap and play a Springleaf Drum, which triggers Darcy to Surveil. We keep Bedevil on top and play a tapped MDFC before passing. Opponent untaps and plays a land before casting History of Benalia. I haven't seen that card since 2020. They make a token and pass the turn. We untap and run out Sedgemoor Witch, followed by a Bloodstained Mire. We hold it for now and pass the turn. Opponent untaps and makes another token with History. They go to main and cast a Guardian Idol before passing the turn. At the end step, we crack our Mire to go grab a tapped dual land. We untap and play a Takenuma so we can cast Judith before passing. Opponent untaps and their History fires off, giving their knights +2/+1. They move to main and drop a Wooded Foothills before casting 3 Blind Mice to make a mouse token. They crack their Foothills to go get a Surveil land. They keep the card on top and pass it back to us without attacking. We untap and draw Tybalt. We run out Black Market Connections here because we don't have a land, so this will help us get caught up with treasures and extra cards. We surveil a Tectonic Hazards to the top and pass it to our opponent. They untap, and their Saga triggers, letting them copy a Knight token. They move to main and run out a Mirari's Wake to buff their team. They play a Marsh Flats before passing the turn. We untap and draw the hazards we knew about. Connection triggers, and we full send, doming ourselves for 6. We don't draw a land, but we do draw a Thoughtseize, so we cast it to make a token with Judith and with our Witch. Darcy surveils a Lolth into the graveyard, and Thoughtseize resolves. We take the March to prevent them from rebuilding, and we follow that with Tectonic Hazards. We give it Death Touch so we can clear away all of their board. We make a token with the Witch and surveil a Swamp to the bin. We move to combat and attack with everything we can. Opponent cracks their flats to go get a tapped duel and takes the damage. Post-combat, we run out Palladium Mirror and pass the turn. Opponent untaps, and their Saga triggers with nothing to target. They play a Field of Ruin before they replay their Reese, followed immediately by a Tendershoot Dryad before passing it back to us. We untap, and they make a token with Dryad. We draw a card, and our connection triggers. Once again, we full send, doming ourselves for 6. We have enough mana here that we can play Obosh, so we play Command Tower and do exactly that. Obosh resolves, and we pass the turn. Opponent untaps and makes another token. They move to main, and their Saga triggers. Too bad it goes to waste, though, as our opponent just plays a land and passes the turn. We untap, and they make yet another token. We draw for turn, and our connections triggers. Once again, we full send, and this time we draw a land. We get down a tapped Hive of the Eye Tyrant and cast Tybalt, which triggers Darcy, and we surveil a land to the bin. We make a token with him and follow that up with a Boggart Trawler to eat their graveyard before passing. At the end step, they activate Reese to double all their tokens. Opponent untaps and makes another token. They move to main and play a Temple of Plenty, followed by Huatli. They definitely made a mistake, though, because instead of activating her immediately, they decide to use Reese first to double their board. This gives us a window to bedevil the Huatli before they can do anything with her. This lets us make some tokens and surveil a Phyrexian Arena to the graveyard. Everything resolves, and they pass the turn with a massive board. We untap, and they make another token. Our connections triggers, and we're getting low on life, so we just draw a card. We don't need the treasure at this point, and the token is just going to die in a moment. We make a token with Tybalt and move to combat. We attack with Darcy to get him with free 3 damage, since they can't block it. After combat, we get into a heated argument with our brother and cast Brotherhood End. This lets us create a pest token and give it Death Touch and lifelink. This is what we were trying to do with Burn Down the House last game, but this time our opponent just doesn't die first. We surveil a Blood Crypt to the bin, and our Wrath resolves, dealing 6 damage to everything on board. Our Imps trigger, which deal 2 damage to the opponent when they die, and our Devils trigger, which deal 1 damage to anything when they die. Total, we can hit our opponent for 6 damage, dropping them to 3, but they just scoop it up while we sit at a casual 218 life. So we saw in the games that both Judith and Obosh are extremely powerful in their own right. The game against Venzer was won on the back of Obosh doubling up our damage, allowing us to represent almost lethal on board, and our opponent just scooped. Then there was the game against Reese, where we gained over 200 life from the Brotherhood's end, giving us such an insurmountable lead. This deck really impressed me with how well balanced it was, performing relatively well whether we had Judith or Obosh at all. As far as losses are concerned, one game I had the Starve extinction and I was so excited to cast it that in my haste, I clicked to create a token instead of giving it lifelink. While gaining almost 400 life or something wouldn't have ended the game, it would have certainly made it more difficult for them to come back from the position they were in and ruin our day. Granted, the mana flare we played didn't help matters either, seeing as they had 100 mana afterwards, which was probably my mistake playing it against a landfall deck. Honestly though, this game is what convinced me to take mana flare out of the deck. We can't take advantage of it like green decks can, and it royally screwed us over here. Another game was against Vorinclex, and this one hurt. Turns out Ragavan isn't better than big dumb green things. Who knew? Although big green creatures are always going to be a struggle if we can't get Judith down and clear the board early like against Goreclaw. We just never really found a window to get Judith down and actually properly build up our board state. That Ragavan got stonewalled pretty early, and so it was really difficult to actually get in and do damage. We were able to kill the Vivian pretty easily, but other than that, we just got steamrolled. Anyway, that's all for today. If you want to check out the deck for yourself, you can find a full deck list in the description below. If you like the video, feel free to subscribe so you can become a member of the Blue Crew today. While you're at it, go ahead and tap that like button too. It adds 1 mana to the YouTube algorithm and I'd greatly appreciate it. If you want to see some more of my content, then you can click on this video here to check out Kenrith and Zerda from last week, or you can click on this playlist to watch some of my shorts.